Welcome, everybody. We are so happy to have you here with us tonight for the second creative writing lecture of the semester with Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. I'm super excited to have him with us. And let me see, quick announcement. The last talk of the series is in 2 weeks with the writer Matthew Salesis. It's on a Wednesday night just like this. Please check that out as well. Also, stay tuned. We'll be sharing our lineup for the spring for the Creative Writing Lecture Series, which we are really excited about. So tonight we'll have a talk. It'll go about a half hour, and then we will welcome your questions. I think, Patrick, may I check with you what our system is with questions? Is there anything I should share with everybody about how to ask questions best?
I think last time it worked pretty well. You can just private chat your question to me, Patrick, Ford Matz, in the Zoom chat, and I'll make sure Ben gets it. I think that.
Okay, yeah, so if you missed that, please just private chat your questions to Patrick, Ford Matz, and I'll do my best to pass it along. So let's jump right in. Our guest tonight is Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. He's the author of a stellar collection of stories called Friday Black, published in 2018. His work is absolutely unique to me in how it fuses a fantastical sensibility with an acute and painful view into our complicated present moment. If there's something magically realist in his approach, it's because what is real has become so challenging to unmask, slippery and difficult to render on the page. If we take a flight of fantasy in his stories, it's because that's the necessary vector towards the cold portraits he excels at, revealing to us a world of injustice, cruelty, the abuse of power, and the neglect of the weak. He grew up in Spring Valley, New York, received his MFA from Syracuse University. He's published in the Paris Review, Esquire, and Guernica, among many other journals. And he's got a heap full of awards and accolades already, including the Stein Book Award and inclusion on the National Book Foundation's 5 Under 35 list. He also has a large and very obsessed readership, including me and everyone I know, eager to read whatever he does next. We are so fortunate to have him here with us tonight. Please join me in welcoming Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah.
Thank you so much. I can feel and see the applause. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much, Ben, for that very kind introduction. Thank you guys for having me here today. I feel genuinely extremely happy to be doing an event with Columbia University, because now I can tell my mom that I'm associated with you guys in some small way and not be lying. But truly, I do feel very at home with you guys. For one, I'm from New York, and for two, for undergrad, I went to an equally prestigious school called SUNY Albany. Perhaps you've heard of it. But yeah, today I'm going to do a lecture and not a reading. And when I do readings, though, when anybody does a reading, maybe they have to make a decision. Basically, what the hell do I give these people? These kind humans who are the types of people who come to book events and want to be made, presumably, to feel something. I have less experience than some, but having had a book out in the world properly has refocused my awareness in something I thought a lot about in drafting my stories, and also something that's in the front of my mind when reading the types of stories that got me to be the kind of writer I am. So today, I want to talk about something we think about often, but sometimes in a limited and reductive way. So I've heard many writers and teachers talk about first lines and the importance of a great first line in a story or novel. If you've ever been in a workshop, the first line of a story is very often going to get mentioned in some capacity, and with good reason. The first line sets a tone and is the door into a story. It is all you're really promised sometimes from any given reader. And for your pleasure, I've actually brought some famous first lines, famous or great first lines for your consideration. 124 was spiteful, from the great Toni Morrison, beloved. Call Me Ishmael, which, I mean, to me doesn't ring off that crazy. No, it's great, from famous Moby Dick. Another one, Jilly took her head out of the oven mainly because it was hot and the gas did not work independently of the pilot light, which is the first line of a story from The Heads of Colored People by Nafisa Thompson Spires. The first great act of love I ever witnessed was split lip bathing his handicapped daughter by George Saunders in a story called Isabel. And I'll get back to George many times later on. You better not tell nobody but God, Alice Walker's famous lines of The Color Purple. And maybe to round us off, you are about to begin reading Italo Calvino's new novel, If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, by Italo Calvino, how he started, If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. These are all wonderful, and certainly they're doing a great amount of work in different ways. Some are establishing a point of view, a kind of tonal energy. I personally favor that kind of staccato and precise energy, and many of these are exactly that. Some are commanding, call me Ishmael, you better not tell, that kind of thing. I think that's intentional. They arrest a kind of power. There's an interesting power dynamic at play. It's almost as if they're saying, you're going to like this, give me the reins and we'll have a good time. Calvino's beginning, in a beautiful way, establishes the meta nature of the experience to come. I would never argue that these first lines are not doing some incredible work. And again, I'm sure they are doing brilliant service to their stories. That said, I myself am less interested in first lines and more interested in first movements. I personally believe we've come to almost fetishize first lines, and I think the focus on the first couple of words that make a story sometimes reduces the magic that these great artists have done. So rather than just the first few lines of a few stories, today I want to talk just a little bit about what I call the first movements. And here I was going to talk about sonatas and how they are comprised of musical movements that are meant to move you in different ways. I basically watched a YouTube video about different movements and why we call them that, but I don't want to bore you with pretend expertise. But if you're curious, movements in regards to classical music, it comes from Renaissance dance music and whatever. But anyways, what are the first movements of a story? And again, before I get into it, I'm like pausing to build up dramatic energy, which is definitely gonna be anticlimactic. But yeah, before I get into it, and despite my illustrious title as lecturer at Columbia, grand lecturer at large, I don't know, all of them maybe. Please understand, I'm just a guy. I'm sure somebody smarter has other ideas, but this is a way I sometimes think about writing that may potentially illuminate something for you. Okay, so for me, when I think about a first movement, I think about the first spaces and opportunities a character in a story is made to actually do something or somehow demonstrate who they are. So the primary thing I'm looking for is the first slice of characterization of a person or even of a place. That's one piece of what I'm calling the first movement. It's hard for a first line to do what I just said in a way that sticks with us. Call me Ishmael on its own wouldn't do too much. When I say the first movement of a story, I'm also thinking about the first paragraphs in which a scene is happening and the reader's kind of amassing knowledge and understanding of the world before there's opportunity for a break. And a break might look a lot of different ways. It might be marked by a scene change or a change in the direction of narration, or even more obviously by either the previously mentioned and a line break. Also, to be less technical, it might just be the first couple of things that happen. The exact measurement of a movement isn't really important. But yeah, in all fiction, but maybe particularly in fiction that is considered surreal, I think that the first movement has another important job. And that is what I want to talk about mostly today. I think a key consideration in the opening movements of surreal fiction, and maybe fiction in general, is building reader generosity while establishing and sustaining readerly interest, oftentimes using story potential or mystery or what the reader does not yet understand. So here's an example. I'm gonna read from a story called Sea Oak by George Saunders. Whenever I do like kind of basically anything literary, I often mention George Saunders because it makes people like me more, I've discovered. To the point I remember I was in South Africa and I was at some dinner for some festival and people were like, it was a good time. People were enjoying it. I mentioned George and everyone just exploded. Oh my God, you know him in real life? And I remember thinking like, God damn it, the white man wins again, even here in Africa. So this is just the beginning of the story, Sea-Oak.
Mhm.
At 6, Mr. Frent comes to the PA and shouts, "Welcome to Joysticks." Then he announces shirts off. We take off our flight jackets and fold them up. We take off our shirts and fold them up. Our scarves we leave on. Thomas Christer's our beautiful boy. He's got long muscles and bright blue eyes. The minute his shirt comes off, 2 fat ladies hustle up the aisle and stick some money in his pants and ask, will he be their pilot? He says, sure. He brings their salads. He brings their soups. My phone rings and a caller tells me to come see her in the Spitfire mock-up. Does she want me to be her pilot? I'm hoping. Inside the Spitfire is Margie, who says she's been diagnosed with chronic shyness syndrome, then hands me an Instamatic and offers me $10 for a close-up of Thomas's tush. Do I do it? Yes, I do. And I could argue that maybe could be just the first movement, but I'll continue just so we have a little bit more to work with. It could be worse. It's worse for Lloyd Betts. Lately, he's put on weight and his hair's gone thin. He doesn't get a call all shift and waits 0 tables and winds up sitting in the P51 wing, playing solitaire in a hunched over position that gives him big gut rolls. I pilot 6 tables and make $40 in tips plus $5 an hour in salary. After closing, we sit on the floor for debriefing. There are times, Mr. Frent says, when one must move gracefully to the next station in life. Like, for example, certain women in Africa or Brazil, I forget which, who either color their faces or don some kind of distinctive headdress upon achieving menopause. Are you with me? One of our ranks must now leave us. No one is an island in terms of being thought cute forever. And so today we must say goodbye to our friend Lloyd. Lloyd, stand up so we can say goodbye to you. I'm so sorry. We're all so very sorry. Oh God, says Lloyd. Let this not be true. But it's true. Lloyd's finished. We give him a round of applause and Frent gives him a farewell pen and the contents of his locker in a trash bag, and out he goes. Poor Lloyd. He's got a wife and 2 kids and a sad little duplex on South Storage Parkway. It's been a pleasure, he shouts desperately from the doorway, trying not to burn any bridges. What a stressful workplace. The minute your cute rating drops, you're a goner. Guests rank us as knockout, honey pie, adequate, or stinker. Not that I'm complaining. At least I'm working. At least I'm not a stinker like Lloyd. I'm a solid honey pie, adequate, heading home with $40 cash. So that's just the beginning of Sea-Oak, and we see a lot happens, and most of it might not be that strange really, except that George keeps us locked into the language of the space. There are multiple effects of doing this. For one, we are just a step behind him, forced to really press into the sentences and make sense of them. George is also very, very efficient. If you think about it, a ton happened in that we got introduced to a space. We saw like sort of a work shift happen. Someone got fired and our protagonist walked home. I think efficiency is one of the hallmarks of Saunders' work. By starting this way, by showing us what is happening, he's applying a kind of pressure to the reader to follow, and they might pull away. They might say, fuck this is weird. But they also might lean in. They might also be delighted by the what is happeningness of the situation and find themselves loving what they do not know. Allowing for this space, trusting the possibility that the reader will enjoy not knowing is a way of building generous spirit. When I say generosity, I mean a sense that the reader is accepting what does not yet fully make sense, at least for a couple lines to them, but is entertaining and hopefully engaging enough to make them feel that these early movements will be fun in and of themselves, and also the potential to feel more on the inside, to understand better, maybe on the horizon. And even if it's not, by story's end, it will ultimately feel like it was worth it. So how do we do that? There's a lot of ways that we can think about it. And then just to maybe give us yet another example, I'll share once more and go through another story called Calm. Then I'll talk about that some more. Calm. Tuesday morning, Jillian from Disasters calls. Apparently, an airman named Lollerton has poisoned a shitload of beavers. I say we don't kill beavers, we harvest them, because otherwise they nibble through our pollution control devices, PCDs, and polluted water flows out of our retention area and into the Eisenhower Memorial Wetland, killing beavers. That makes sense, Jillian says, and hangs up. The press has a field day. Air Force kills beavers to save beavers, says one headline. Murdered beavers speak of Air Force cruelty, says another. We may have to PIDS this, Mr. Romney says. I checked the files. There's a circa 1984 tortoise-related PIDS from a base in Oklahoma. There's a wild horse-related PIDS from North Dakota. Also useful is a Clinton-era PIDS concerning the inadvertent destruction of a dove breeding ground. From these, I glean an approach. I admit we harvested the beavers. I concede the innocence and creativity of beavers. I explain the harvesting as a regrettable part of an ongoing effort to prevent pollution events from impacting the autonomy. Finally, I pledge we'll find a way to preserve our PCDs without, in the future, harming beavers. We are, I say, considering transplanting the beaver population into an innovative beaver habitat to be installed upstream of the retention area. I put it into PowerPoint. Rimney comes back from break and reads it. Innovative beaver habitat, he says. I say, we're considering, I say. All hail the king of PIDS, he says. I call Ed at the paper, Jason, Heather, and Rando at News 10, Action 7, and News Team 2, respectively. Then Larry from Facilities. I have him reserve the Farragut Auditorium on Wednesday night. And just like that, I've got a fully executable PIDS and can go joyfully home to my wife and our crazy, energized, loving kids. Just kidding. I wish. And if you're wondering why is these stories copied and pasted into Word, it's definitely not because I was afraid of running out of my New Yorker articles for the month. That's definitely not why. Why would you even say that? But yeah, this story, again, isn't particularly surreal yet. But I believe by letting you into a character space and not watering down the specificity of language, Saunders is training us to re-see the world through his very specific filters. It is a super Saundersian move to have extremely inflected language early on, sometimes to the point where you really feel like an insider, or an outsider, rather. And still, he uses charm and humor to get us to stay engaged, to want to be a part of the space, and very quickly, we might as well be a scantily clad waiter at Joysticks or a quick thinking PR guy ourselves. Specificity and sort of a particular stylized language that is rewarding cultivates reader generosity. That is a secret necessity. That's part of the secret necessity of these opening movements in the works of writers like George Saunders and the stuff that I try to do. I think you want to build the expectation to learn. That is, you want the reader to expect, and more importantly, accept that the world they are going to be moving through is not necessarily one that they have all the keys to understanding. It is not the YMCA or your local post office, or it might be, but the defining characteristics of these spaces will not be that they operate in ways you expect, or they might be operating exactly as they should. What I believe is the generosity cultivating move is the commitment to the language of the space, even if the reader is not yet equipped to fully understand that. A commitment to the situation that does not coddle or baby the reader into understanding. In a George Saunders story, the language is just as specified at the very beginning of a story as it might be at the end. Excuse me. If anything, in terms of specialization, the early bits are usually a little bit more inflected with whatever brand of specificity he might be conjuring for that story. The result of this type of first movement is that the reader is forced to lean in. They are forced to scrutinize the language and find the rhythm and immerse themselves in it. George is doing something different than than asking us to give him the reins. This isn't really he isn't always doing the call me Ishmael thing. What he is doing is sort of for me, is like putting like a strange new, I don't know, like spaceship controller console in front of us and saying, you can drive this ship with me. You can drive this. And some readers are definitely going to say, fuck that. Some people won't take that leap, won't press the buttons. They won't be comfortable with the moments of potential misunderstanding. And so the experience will be rejected. Part of cultivating generosity is getting the reader to really commit to being in a world that is not their own, even if it is. And that's why I think this kind of thing is particularly maybe sometimes equipped well for surreal work. And part of trying to cultivating readerly generosity is knowing that there are some readers that just won't vibe with it. So like I said, I think it's especially important to generate readerly generosity in stories that are considered surreal or fantasy or sci-fi, whichever genre plays with the idea of real. I personally have a lot of trouble with genre definitions and understanding their use. For me, I think a lot of what I'm talking about must be done in any story, surreal or not surreal. That said, it is not unreasonable to acknowledge some readers are not trained to accept worlds that diverge too drastically from their own. That is what I think people are saying, at least in my ear, when they affirm that they do not like sci-fi or fantasy. And I'm not going to reprimand those people, even though I think such a belief suggests an imagination that could be further developed, maybe. But there's also a possibility that the imagination is developed and that their generosity has been taken advantage of without reward in the past. So I understand that as well. There are for sure writers that fall in love with their own world building, the magic of their conceits, and forget that the story doesn't happen at that macro idea level. The story for me happens at the character level. And those conceits, those surreal elements are elements that are always in service of these characters and not the other way around. So yes, I started today talking about readings, but really I started with a dumb joke about Columbia and Prestige or whatever. I don't exactly even remember. And for me, literally all my events, I start with some kind of a joke. And I do that because in the past, I've done readings cold, like jump straight into reading, whatever. And it almost always sucks, like really bad for me. The energy feels kind of stale and kind of foreboding. And like we're all collectively afraid of something. And I kind of like hate it, actually. So now in the past, I hated it. Now I love it. But now I tell a joke or try to find something funny because one, I need to manage my anxiety. Two, I want the crowd to chill. It's like kind of my way of saying, I completely respect you coming here today, but also I'm a very regular and chill guy. And three, isn't it a strange and beautiful thing that we've gathered here in the name of art? I don't actually think all those things explicitly every time. I'm not like weird, but I think that's what I'm trying to do when I tell a joke to open an event. In George's work and the work of many surreal artists that I love, their first movements do some of the same stuff, some of those same moves that I've noticed, and I think I've internalized some of them. And they aren't exactly the same, but I think they're along the same lines. So first, as I've pointed out, George isn't afraid to Saunders up his diction and syntax. There are words he's made up and words that we aren't used to seeing all over the place. It's probably the most notable feature of his work on the surface level. He also likes to enter an established language with language that is the product of the space that the character is inhabiting, and almost be like joysticks, the restaurant becomes like the language. Same thing with whatever PR space in ComCom. Second, even through the specialized language, George finds a way to make us laugh. You will almost always get a chuckle or two very early in a Saunders story. That to me is perhaps the most important generosity building move. Same thing with doing the ratings and same things in my stories. Over the course of a story, you want to kind of bring the reader closer and closer to you. You want to make them smile, and if you can make them laugh, I think that's a major key in getting them to really trust you. At least it is in my process. A smile or a laugh is proof that you've been made to feel something. And even if that laugh emerges in a world you don't quite understand, if we've been made to laugh, there's always the promise of more delight to come. So I think first movements that include some type of humor. For me, that's often the way I'm trying to make sure that's a part of it. Third, George's openings pair the bleak and funny with shots and peaks of earnestness. there's always a hit of like, oh, in the middle of all this stuff that might be going on. Sometimes it's the pairing of the particular bleak and weird with a genuine hope that makes us feel something like endeared with the characters. In the case of ComCom, it's that part right at the end. And the final note that was this: I call edit the paper Jason, Heather, and Randall at News 10, Anchor 7, Action 7, and News Team 2, respectively, the Marriott facilities. I have him reserved the Farragut Auditorium for Wednesday night. And just like that, I've got a fully executable PIDs and can go joyfully home to my wife and our crazy, energized, loving kids. Just kidding. I wish. You know, exactly. Aw. The story already has turned from cold and corporate to familiar to wanting to human to present. And all that, I'd argue, helps us understand and accept the ghosts that eventually inhabit these stories. Yeah, I forgot to mention both these stories involve later on, after their first movements, involve loved ones that are present post-death. And I'd argue that all those things George does to start the story prepare us for what's to come, even though they are not yet actually surreal. We've already been tuned into the world. We've already become so in tune with the world that's almost like, so what if undead aunties are in lazy boy couches? We've already been taught to drive the spaceship. Discovery was the name of the game from the beginning, so why not take it to whichever distant land? As writers, we have to remember it is a privilege to be read. We try to make sure the journeys we take readers on won't be trivial. We respect their wit and generosity and try to assume they are not only equipped to understand, but are potentially smarter than us. That's what I aim for anyways. And I think that kind of respect gets reflected back in the form of a reader being willing to accept some of the strangeness in my first book, whether it be undead fetuses or reoccurring nuclear fallout or floating hospital patients. Writers like George showed me it's not only okay to jump right into exactly what we want to tell, but that if we do so with care, attention, humor, and heart, the reader will follow just about anywhere we want to go. All right, so that's that. Thank you, guys.
That was great. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Well, have a lovely evening, everyone. And thank you again.
Bye, Erin.
Bye.
Thank you. What a fantastic talk. So we're going to get some questions.
Oh, wait, I'm going to stay for questions.
Okay, I'm going to mute you if you don't have a question. There we go. Send your questions to Patrick. I wonder if, Nana, if I could start with a question. You know, I love that story, Sea Oak. It was so great to hear you read from it. And it made me realize that George is doing world building. And really, I hadn't thought of his work that way, but obviously there is this unusual world that he draws us into. And I'm wondering, with your stories, do you think of world building as a thing you do? Is it something that seems to just happen? I feel like this term has come up more and more over the past even few years.
Yeah.
Does it mean much to you?
It's a good question. Like, I think I do it in almost every story, even if it's a totally like not surreal story. I think I have to like take particular lengths to do it in stories that are not that are in a particularly divergent world, I guess. I don't know that I go like, oh, this is the part where I have to world build, but I did, for example, like in the final story in the book is called Through the Flash.
Yeah.
I was like, I have to have this girl die pretty much like twice in the first like 3 pages, 3 times in the first, to like make the sort of conceit settle into people's minds. This is something that's happening, you know? And that's the kind of world building to make it like, I that could have not happened that way, but the reason it has to happen that way, just in terms of like an understanding, I want to get like that sort of physical reality out of the way.
Yeah.
So we can get more and more like involved in caring for that person. And I think often I'll bury it in a lot of like silliness or intensity or whatever. But for sure, like in another example is the story, The Era, they're literally like in, I call it How It Was class, but oh, conveniently, they're talking about the history of the world today. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's almost like a particular, I don't think I get to do that again. I think that was like, you know, today in history, we're talking about the way our world got to be this way. So that to me is like the most obviously, like, I think you can see the stitching the most obviously there, but I feel like it gets lost, not lost, but like, there's something funny going on. The dynamics in the classroom become entertaining and you almost forgive or don't worry about the pretty overt world building kind of happening.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's go to some of these questions in the chat. Here's one. How do you choose which realities you want to fictionalize, whether through surrealism or realism?
It's a good question. I don't know if I have so much of a choice of it. If I go through a story and like I need something to happen, I just make it happen. And if that thing that I need to happen isn't based in reality, then now I guess it's surreal or sci-fi or whichever. And again, I also want to like make a point that like I'm like super down to accept. I'm not one of those people who view any of those genres as pejorative. I do not, definitely do not. Or less than or worse or whatever. I just know that it's not a part of my thought process explicitly of like putting myself in any of those, whichever category. And that even includes literary, you know. And of course, obviously, you know, we aspire to that and this, that, or whatever, but I've never sat down and be like, this will be a literary story. This will be a sci-fi story. This will be whichever. I've never done it ever. So I kind of write the story that feels good to me. But I mean, I guess like, I don't want to, there are times where I'll know like I'm interested in this phenomenon that I'm just interested in this particular thing.
Yeah.
And right off the bat, I'll know the story like Light Spitter. I knew off the bat I was interested in like a post life reunion of some sort. So it was going to require some element of surreal off rip. But again, like to me, the sort of consensus reality is a little bit of an illusion anyways. There's, first off, we all have dreams off number one, but also like some of us might talk about ghosts and it's not a joke or a surreal thing at all. Like that's some people's experience of life. There's so many, and I guess maybe even moreover, if I were an astrophysicist, the way I would look at the world would be very different. And if for me to suddenly be an astrophysicist's mind walking through the world would feel surreal to me. So I just try to be aware of that. And for me, I know that whichever a story needs, I try to like just go with it.
Okay, great. All right, here's the next one. Amazing lecture. Do you think final movements should mirror or speak to the first movement?
That's such a good question. And I appreciate you saying this is, I haven't done many like lectures. And so I appreciate you saying that. Whoever that was. And I think that final movements are for me, they often do having like some echoes of the first one, but you never know. You don't necessarily need that sort of neat circularity. I think that I'm really into like the escalate thing. You escalate, and then like see where you can get to it, where you can get to. It's hard to end. Ending is hard, you know, but I think that every story almost has its own DNA, and some of them maybe need to like echo back, and some of them might need to go on its own complete, might be in a totally different space by the time you get there. So I hope that's not a cop-out answer, but I think every story needs like something.
I'm kind of curious about your experience in an MFA program and like what that was like for you. Did you know you wanted to go to one for a long time? And do you feel like what sort of role do you feel they play? Is there, yeah, just a general question.
Imagine I was like terrible. No, I'm actually one of the people, and I almost feel like not that cool when I say it. I'm so grateful for the MFA program. I went to Syracuse. Shout out to Q Mob. I see Angelo here. Gang. I feel very, very grateful. I was exposed to so many things that I knew nothing about. It wasn't like, obviously it was it wasn't easy. There's problems. The problems that everyone talks about MFAs were the problems I think I experienced. My program, I was the only Black person in my cohort. And I was also generally very young. I was like 22, 23 when I got there. I felt very, very, very stupid for a very long time, because it's funny, even like someone was talking about pedagogy when we started. I remember hearing that word and like having no idea what it meant at all.
Right.
And I remember that first year in Syracuse, Googling everything. I had never heard of any of these things people were talking about. I didn't come from like some like, I don't know, literary whatever. And so that's why I still have some of those resistances, because to me, they feel very false, like to my reading experience prior to being part of a literary community. Or not actually a literary community, but like just a community that cares about the word and reading and the art. I think I put the quotes on it because there's also, I became also aware of, but not only aware of, but like infected is too strong a word, but like infected with some of those like things that I have to push it back against explicitly now. So that's why I have to say I don't view genre as pejorative, because I know so many people in the culture do. And I never did before, but now it's like I have to say that because there was a time where, because of external forces, I kind of did, or I thought maybe this is less. And I spent a lot of time, I said this before, that I didn't know. I thought even my surreal stuff was like lesser than my other stuff, or I thought there was like some hierarchy I wasn't understanding. And I would go to George was my thesis advisor, and be like, tell me like what kind of writer to be. And I'm very lucky, because I'd be like, should I do this? Should I do that? Should I be this kind of writer? Should I be this kind of writer? He was just like, yes, you know. And I really got lucky that he was like that, because I think the MFA, if you're not careful and not aware, it can be a breeding ground for weird people are just so good at trying to find hierarchies and who's better than who and all this like dumb shit kind of. And it can, but it also can be such a beautiful space of people trying to do something important earnestly and sincerely together. And I really like that. But there's always like, it's so hard. There's so many, you know, it's a lot of people, a lot of sensitive people together. So a lot of crazy shit happens. But
Yeah,
I was fortunate enough. And I was like, also I knew I could kind of eyeball like stuff going down for a while. So I know like when to not be like in like the, I don't know, fuckery. But I had a pretty good experience.
Okay, great. Here's a question. This is a long
You know
one.
what I'm talking about. You guys know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah. Yeah. When it comes to world building, especially in fantastical settings, how do you know when to stop world building? When trying to understand and explain the rules of your world, how much do you think that you need to know in order to confidently get the story off the ground, versus cauterizing further questions about how the world works, both for the reader and yourself?
What a really smart question. For me, and because of that, I'll cite someone else. What's her name? Leslie. She wrote "What It Means When a Man Falls from the Sky." She says
Leslie
like,
Amira.
yeah,
Yeah.
She said, mind your character's business. And I remember thinking like, yeah, you know. So I'll early on, like I'll do like what is necessary, like basically the bare minimum in the short stories. Like what do you need to understand like why even this?
Yeah.
So like this girl, no one can die here. That matters a lot, you know. I'm gonna have that be displayed. I chose to have it be earlier rather than later, just because I felt like for what I knew, what I wanted to have in the story, it would have been too much. But that comes through revision. All that stuff comes through revision. I'm big on revision. I feel like the answer is just like through revision, you'll discover it. But I also will say, mind your character's business. Like if they don't have to if they want to think about it on a normal day, like they don't have to mention it. And as it arises, it comes through, especially in the short story form. I feel like you have to get comfortable with like carving your tip of the iceberg and just knowing there's a lot there. And that potential for depth is not a bad thing. You know, I think a lot of my stories, I can imagine realities that exist in them that don't intersect with my character. But if they don't intersect with my character, they're not necessary for that story, for me.
Yeah.
Because you could go endlessly with that stuff, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. maybe just for a last little thing, can you let us know what you're working on now? Is that private? Is it a secret?
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a secret, even though I feel like I told this joke. I told my girlfriend I told this joke so many times. I used to say, I'm working a novel, codenamed Top Secret Novel. And I swear I've said that like, I don't even have the heart to say it as a joke anymore. I've said it
That would
so
actually be a great title though.
Top Secret Novel. If I was like more important or like, I don't think it's like top secret if like nobody really cares. It's like, okay, bro, like great. It's top secret, like, well, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's I'm working on a novel and I'm sure it'll be considered sci-fi and surrealish, maybe no, probably more sci-fi, and it is very difficult. I hate myself every day for like making such a difficult sort of thing to do. It's super brutal, but I'm trying to have fun with it. I did like the other day the hotel thing, and I was in there like for like 4 days, like going crazy and like that whole thing. You know what I mean?
Just to hide out and get a lot done.
Yeah, like really knock out a lot of words.
Yeah.
That was like a month ago. I keep talking about it, like it was like a way of like letting myself know I did something recently. But yeah, I did that. And I've also been working on like an essay, like a more serious essay, I guess, than I've ever put out, and some short stories as well. So I try to like be nice to myself because it's a super brutal time. I even regret that I didn't like. I always go back and forth between like honoring and mentioning the difficulty people are surely feeling right now, and then also maybe trying to be a respite and like not say anything about it. But I know it's very difficult, and I try to be kind to myself. I think everyone has to be kind to themselves in regard to productivity and, you know, making stuff in the middle of like literal pandemic and all this trauma that's everywhere. So I am working on a novel. That's a long way of saying that.
Well, tonight has actually been a great respite to just get inside your mind a little bit. Your stories mean a lot to a lot of us, and we're super excited to see what you do next. Thank you for being so generous with your thoughts about craft, and it was amazing to listen to you, and just can't wait to read what's next.
I appreciate it, you guys. If it was dumb, let me know, because I'll work on it, but I appreciate you guys.
It was not dumb. All right. Well, thanks so much. Yeah. Take care. We'll see you around.
Have fun, guys. Be good. All right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you all for coming out to the event. Really appreciate it. See you in a couple weeks.